Let's have a big round of applause for Nathan for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. So my name is Nathan Blinn. I'm the Director for Advanced Construction Technologies at Eagle Construction, as well as the Principal Researcher for Architectonic. So it's our subsidiary company that we started to simply focus on construction technology services. So my background is both academic and industry related. So did my graduate studies and got my PhD at the University of Florida, where I taught for 5 years, specifically in this area, on not only the technology itself, but everything from reality capture through BIM, and focused my research on integration strategies and the process we all know too well that is not an easy one to navigate. So what I'm planning on talking about today is going to start to talk a little bit about Architectonic, just explain who we are so you understand my background and my current kind of lens that I'm looking at all this through. Talking about the BIM Workforce, just a quick hit analysis, then into BIM 360, how I've used it in the past, how we're currently using it, and how that helps create our relationships, as well as an example that we used at Autodesk, that we presented at Autodesk University for an academic and professional partnership to start to create some of these ways of creating a connection with the future workforce, and then some of the certification programs that I'm working on with an eye to the future. So what I'm hoping is a lot of ground to cover in 30 minutes. What I'm hoping is it just plants some seeds in your mind, gives you some things to think about as we all move on and try to advance our industry and what we do. Since we all clearly love what we do and love what we're talking about, hopefully this will keep pushing us in a new direction. So with no further ado, Architectonic is essentially a construction technology services company. We've created the Tech Lab. We're over in West Broad Village. What we focus on is the development, integration, training, and consulting for advanced technologies. So working with BIM 360, Forge, trying to develop new platforms and interfaces that help make this data and information accessible, as well as moving into the residential space and bringing the residential space into the 21st century, utilizing the full breadth of tools at your disposal through the Revit platform. So not just having a pretty model for the customer, but using the data effectively in the residential space, which I think we all know is lagging behind the commercial space, right? But there's a lot of great advantages there where the cycle time's shorter and you can apply faster. So that's what we're working on. And we do service the AECO industry holistically. So Eagle is our primary, so we're a subsidiary of them. So they're our primary client, but we do work with other engineers, architects, and builders kind of all over the country to try to help bring everybody with us as we try to improve the industry as a whole. So our primary area of operation right now is in the building information modeling space, converting files, converting processes from the traditional CAD process into this space, and making sure that what we're doing is effective and sustainable for those companies, as well as in-house laser scanning, drone mapping, GPS-driven surveying, and process development to help kind of take all of this information, which is all well and good, but it's only as good as it is as it can get to the field. So trying to make sure we bring it out to the field and put it in the hands of those who are really empowered when they have it. So now that you kind of have the lens that I'm looking at all of this through currently, let's talk a little bit about the BIM workforce. So we are all part of this workforce. We know that it's hard to find good talent, and that's not something that is necessarily a bad thing. It's just something we have to work on, right? So some of the information that came out from McGraw-Hill a number of years ago, I'm hoping they do their next round of data for the North America region. The most recent one they put out was for Saudi Arabia. So I'll focus on North America here. Essentially what we've seen over the past number of years, we can all attest to it, is that adoption is increasing across all markets, all areas of AEC. And we've seen that pretty steady. The data's pretty clear on that. When we come over to the implementation levels, we're seeing a transition. When you look over to the 2014 data, which was realized and exceeded, you saw a transition from companies that said they use BIM and used it a little bit, to now if you say you use BIM, generally you use it pretty heavily, which is just a shift in an understanding in the software and what it can do for you. So this is a pretty reasonable trend that I think we've all seen, right? Once your company starts to adopt this, you start to push into it fairly heavily as owners require it and so on and so forth. The next side of it is that it doesn't seem to really matter whether it's an architect, an engineer, a contractor, or an owner. We're seeing a similar uptick in adoption. Across all the research that we've done, all the studies that are done, that adoption is happening. And it's happening globally, not just in the United States, which is a good sign. The part I want to talk about is this part, which is the workforce itself. So they did a study to look at the years of experience that people have using BIM, And from 2009 to 2012, you saw a huge shift, which you'd kind of expect. And when you first look at the data, no, they didn't survey the same people, because that would be misleading. But their study that they did basically saw that in 2009, the majority of people had only been using things for about 2 years, right? Which makes sense, because maybe just getting into it. In 2012, you had a lot higher usage, so people have been using it for a lot longer. But what you didn't see on the other side was a backfill of people in the beginner stage. So people who identified themselves as beginners versus experts, you saw an inversion in what existed. So in 2012, you had more experts and advanced users, but it wasn't being backfilled by additional beginners coming into the industry. And I think we've all started to see that. I'm sure I have shared experiences, and I hope we get to talk about it, where as we all start to get better at it, it's harder to find that new talent coming in, right? And that's what this is indicating, is that the people who got in on the train early stuck with it and are staying there, but we're not backfilling with new people to help fill the need that we have within the industry. So as I move through the next couple parts of the presentation, I want you to kind of think about a handful of things. So think about how a focus on academic collaboration, how we can partner with academic institutions of all kinds to start identifying missing skill sets, start looking at emerging trends, identifying how we can start to build that workforce up. Think about some of the successful strategies you found for not only finding new people, but training them, certifying them, getting them up to speed, what's worked for you. Hopefully we'll be able to have a good conversation about that, as well as what you and your organization perceive the importance of developing the workforce in the BIM and VDC space, right? We all love what we do, but what's the importance of inspiring others to be just as excited about it as we are? And then an important one that I've come across recently is, how do you feel about the difference between developing new talent or finding talent that already exists? What do you see there? Because that helps drive where you want to put your efforts into developing the workforce. So let's keep that in mind as we jump through the rest of this. So BIM 360. We all know it now. It's come a long way in the past 4 years, I think. They've made quite a few changes. So the BIM 360 platforms, as they exist today, currently with Eagle and through the tech platform, we're using BIM 360 docs, so laying that foundation to create that conversion into the data space that then we can lay the rest of the pieces of BIM 360 on top of. The plan over the next handful of months, years, so on and so forth, is to bring in plan, build, and layout to start not only being able to be more effective in planning our projects and communities, but to be able to use that information more effectively, get that information in the hands of the subcontractors and the people out in the field. And that's the transition we have started at this point. The exciting thing is that I'm glad I was here for the Forge conversation. That's the next step that we're moving into. So once we lay the foundation, how can we make that information easier for people to get through the Forge platform, right? Of course, after Forge, moving into the academic partnership side. Where I found success using BIM 360 with the academic partnership side is, of course, with BIM 360 docs, and then on the design side, where you can all be in models at the same time. You can work with students, educators, other people remotely, and be able to create that unified experience using the BIM 360 platform. And the great thing about this is that all academic institutions have the opportunity to get all of this software for free for their students. So there's no barrier to entry for academic institutions. It just takes one person to reach out to Autodesk and create that relationship. I think we all know Autodesk is pretty good about giving their software away to students for free, so that we all use it later, right? So definitely something to think about as we move forward. Those are the things we've used and had success with, and I'll give you some examples as we move forward. So currently on the residential side with BIM 360, we have a number of projects set up. So I had a number of ideas running through my head with the Forge platform and what I'm going to do to make setting all this up easier as we move forward. But the way we basically move through it all is currently where we are is our field team has access to this information. We're starting to get them used to it so that we can make the conversion from our current back office platform into this space. So to help them utilize this information to not only visualize the information, the accurate information that wasn't printed 2 months ago, but also to understand how they can send feedback, mark things up, send it back, and have that constant communication with the office as customizations happen. We're loading in not only our models themselves, but also data related to how it sits on the site. So using our laser scanning and reality capture tied with our GPS-driven surveying to actually site the homes effectively so that we can look at the topography of the site and make effective decisions and not just leave it up to the guys in the field. Allow them to have good conversations with everybody and make effective data-driven decisions utilizing this information, all the way from the very beginning when we're designing a new project and trying to figure out what we can fit effectively on the site, out to when it's actually in the field and we have to set those final elevations. So that's some of what we're using it for. The main things that BIM 360 has done for us, both commercially and academically, is improved our ability to not only integrate and start working with back office software, but to provide access to subcontractors, field team members in a more real-time manner while being flexible. So of course with the customizations we do, you have to be able to be flexible. It's not something that's written in stone. And then to develop new solutions that I'm going to be able to feed in, as well as then that collaboration piece is key. So collaborate not only with subcontractors in our team, but also with academic institutions as we move forward. So talking about that collaboration, how we dive into that with these academic institutions currently to help kind of bolster that workforce and inspire a new generation of BIM people is, of course, where every single one of us, our mind would go immediately is internships, right? So we start there, we bring them in. We've partnered with a number of different institutions to start bringing in interns. I have 2 in my office now, and we have 4 others throughout the company who know how to use the software and help bring everybody else along with them while they're there for the summer. Looking at also certified internships, so reaching out to those institutions you have a relationship with or that you create to do long-term. So more placements, right? They spend 8 months there. They get college credit for it. It becomes more of a learning opportunity that you're not just exposing them to your company, but to career opportunities that they might otherwise not have known about, right? The third thing is sponsorships. So working with higher education institutions conducting research in this space. So we actually sponsor students and work with them on their research to help provide industry backup to what they're doing and help them create industry-driven hypotheses that they can move their research through and help drive the industry and create contributions. It's a really interesting way to create that partnership and be exposed to those emerging trends. So definitely something to think about. All of this I would consider kind of connected learning, right? So what we're doing here today, all of those different pieces. I have a handful of institutions that I've worked with or have colleagues at that I know do this kind of stuff fairly regularly. If you reach out to somebody on the academic side and tell them you want to collaborate and create and help them create an exercise for a student, pretty much guaranteed you won't have any resistance, right? They love having people from industry come in and help work on how to create an experience for students, how to expose them to new career opportunities. So definitely something to think about how we can be a continuing part of this process, not just academic institutions, but also continuing education. How can we help develop it, help push things forward so that the needle's always moving in this direction? So a quote that I love on experiential learning, I won't read the quote to you, but essentially John Dewey, he's a famous educator and psychologist. What he kind of proposed, which I found to be extremely true, is that instead of giving somebody something to learn, give them something to do that makes them think. So don't tell them how to do it, just give them something to think about, and they'll learn on their own. And that's especially with what we do true, right? I think Autodesk does it to us quite a bit. Here's an API, have fun, right? So we have to come up with how we do it, and it's extremely effective. And so think about that in how you work with these academic institutions and budding professionals or technical schools to help bring people along. The experiential learning not only helps build practical appreciation for the concepts that they're learning and give them a hands-on experience and exposure to career opportunities, but on the professional side, it creates a no-risk environment for testing. So what are those new ideas that you can't test on a live project and you probably don't have time for just to do on your own? This is a good way for you to do that, right? Have students help you go through that process. Test maybe a slightly different workflow, see how efficient it is. So it's kind of an exciting way to move through it. And this exact thing is something that we did for Autodesk University 2 years ago, is we created what we're calling a collaborative coordination exercise. What we did was we partnered with a professional, so this is while I was still at the University of Florida, we partnered with a professional entity to develop a project to provide an opportunity for students to get hands-on VDC management experience, as well as give the industry partners the opportunity to move into BIM 360 and test some things that they couldn't test on a live project, a few different workflows. So I'm going to kind of move through the exercise fairly quickly. Essentially what we did was it was in 4 stages. First stage, we worked with the industry partner to identify mutually beneficial goals. What do our students need to learn? what does the industry partner want to test, right? Something we all could probably think of like 3 things we'd like to test, but just can't do on a live project. How could we have students or academic researchers help us, right? Once we think about all that and we prepare BIM 360 and get that all up and running, we moved in and kicked the project off and had a full project kickoff meeting. The project we decided to do was a coordination project. So we took a big hotel job that they had just finished coordination on. They thought they could have done some things a little bit different, and we presented it to the students and gave them the live coordination models. Put them in BIM 360, assigned their roles, did an actual kickoff meeting just like any other project, and then prepared them for stage 2, which was a 3-hour coordination meeting. So we actually did a live coordination meeting, had them in what was at the time BIM 360 team, before it became design, had them in there actually live updating the model and making the changes to coordinate all of the trades. So each of them was assigned a different trade, and they had to live coordinate and have these discussions with the contractor as the kind of general contractor. The academics were the owners, so making sure they met all those requirements, and then had them walk through this experience. Threw a couple wrinkles in, and we took the actually fully coordinated models and then broke them so we could control what they were going to run into a little bit, and so that our industry partner could test those handful of things that they wanted to try out a little bit in a more controlled environment. As you can imagine, taking a full model like that and giving it to a group of 20 to 30 master's students, the model could get messed up pretty quick. So we wanted to control where things came from and help them learn why you have to be so careful when you're in these models and authoring those tools. So this is actually how we had it set up on the day of coordination. Every single one of the students was at their computer terminal, logged in to the live model, logged into what was Glue at the time, is now Coordinate, and then we had it up in the front and live streamed in our industry partner from a different state to do the coordination activity and run through it all. Went through 3 iterations of that, and the students, they actually enjoyed themselves. I was a little worried that they were going to get kind of sick of it after the first round, but they actually ended up, class went a little bit long because they had more questions and more questions and more questions. But then the great part was at the end, we came back the next course, the next class, and had the industry partner explain to them how the actual coordination process went. How'd that all go? And exposed a lot of them to some career opportunities and to some things they hadn't thought about. Right? Some of them thought, oh, well, we're learning how to model. That's great, but I don't want to do that forever, so what does that mean? So they got to talk to a superintendent. They got to talk to a project manager, the VDC director, and understand the implications of what they're learning for the industry so that there's more than just being a modeler, right? There's a lot more to it, and we need a lot more than that. So that's just one example of how a partnership activity could go. Went really well. We were really pleased with it, and they still do it to this day, just with different projects each year to help the students learn. So the next part about how we can help build the workforce is, of course, through our certification and education programs, but there's a lot to think about there. I know some of you here have worked on the BIM-R project. You probably have the CM BIM certifications, of course, certified professionals, certified users, all of those different things, right? The great thing about all of these is it provides an opportunity and a platform to learn and become specialized in something, right? It gives the opportunity to really kind of at least start to understand the playing field that we're working with as professionals come in and we try to evaluate their skills before we bring them on board or as we decide how we're going to train them. The one thing that the current certification platform doesn't have is some sort of universal language, right? If you're an engineer, you know, a PE after your name. You go through school, you have a PhD. You finish as an architect, you get your license. But in the BIM and VDC space, there's no universal understanding of what it means to be a BIM professional, right? There's no certification, there's no way to really roll it all through. These are all that really great step towards that. Some of the things that are being worked on right now, so I'm working actually on a team with Autodesk to do some skill tree development and start the process of creating some of these things. So how do we understand what skills are needed as a BIM professional? What skills are needed at what level of your career, and how can we support the building of those skills in an effective way? So what we're working through is looking at the different levels, whether you're at a basic level, an intermediate level, or an advanced level, where that puts you in your career, what roles tie to that, and what skills you should be expected to have at those levels. Now that includes non-software specific skills, so right now we're not talking about software, we're talking about just general skills in that space, and then we'll be able to convert that into actual training programs, provide resources, and start to lay the foundation for creating kind of a more universal understanding of what it means to be a VDC or a BIM professional in today's world. So we're at those first stages in this project. It's going pretty well, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of data to go through as we're going through this. So people from all over the country are kind of talking through this, and there's hundreds of pages of things that we're talking about, so it takes some time. The next group that I'm working with is the Academic Interoperability Coalition. They're focusing more on the education side of things, right? So not so much the technical skills side, but the education side. So we all know that accreditation is very important for schools, both architecture, construction, engineering. So what the AIC has done is basically taken all those accreditation procedures, everything that's currently out there, and tried to start to understand how it currently speaks to the necessity for some of this VDC knowledge within the workforce. So they've gone through a really extensive study to create this body of knowledge framework that then we can start to build new accreditation standards on top of. So instead of just saying we should require BIM in construction education, okay, but what does that mean? Right? What does it mean to require that? What skills should a project manager with a construction degree have? What skills should an architect have when they come out of architecture school? You know, all of those things are now being able to be formalized so that they can be presented as a united front to say the accreditation needs to include these things in its next iteration. So I can definitely pass some of this information along. It's a very interesting study if you ever get a hankering to do some reading. But it's really interesting to start thinking about what you do every day and how those skills have developed over your career and what it meant at each stage of your career to have certain skills, right? It seems simple, but then when you think about how do you then take that and apply it to building the workforce at the front end and creating accreditation standards and training standards, it's kind of interesting to think about. So that's what we've started to do. So all of these things that I've talked about kind of lead to one big thing, which is the next generation needs to be trained and brought up appropriately in this new space. So BIM and VDC is still realistically completely new in the world of AECO, right? When you look at the lifespan of the industry as a whole, what we all do is still relatively new. Jobs that exist today did not exist 10 years ago. And so it's an exciting time to be in our position, but it also gives us a lot to think about, I think. So I'm going to end with this to then move on to our conversation and start to have a discussion about some of the seeds that hopefully I've planted, is why is it important to think about this? Why is it important to think about education, right? We all have a million things to do. Why is it important to think about how these things tie together? So I urge you to think about these things as you're going through your next week or so, kind of think about these things as you're doing your job. Firstly, what do you see the future of our industry being? In an ideal world, what do you think we could be in 5, 10, 20 years, right? What does that mean to you? The second question that builds on that is, where do you think the skills, passion, inspiration in the future that you're hoping, where does all of that come from, right? So hopefully you want to be a part of it, your colleagues are going to be a part of it, but then how do we build the back end to make that a reality? Next, and I would argue probably most importantly, is how can you be somebody who inspires the new generation to come into the workforce and find careers in a space that we all know and love, but that really is kind of a found area, right? I think all of us probably have a very unique story for how we got to where we are. So how do we inspire kids coming out of high school, going into college, to think about a career at this, not as something that they find while they're there, but something that they knew about before they got there, and something that they started pursuing from the very beginning. And then lastly, you know, everything that we do, especially as VDC professionals, creates opportunities for ourselves and our colleagues, but it creates opportunities for future professionals as well. So some of what we do, we're creating jobs that didn't exist years ago. There will be jobs that we find in 5 years that didn't exist now as we create new things in the industry and keep pressing forward. I have a student right now who's working part-time who goes to VCU, who's doing my laser scanning and GPS work. So when he came in and started talking to me about his interests, he didn't think that that was even a possibility. So we brought him in, we trained him, and now he's doing something that never would have thought of 8 months ago. So everything that you do has that continuing impact. So how can you be a part of it? How can we continue to push it forward? And then the last thing that I tell my employees every day, or at least a couple times a week, is all we can try to do is be better today than we were yesterday and be better tomorrow than we were today. If we do that, eventually, everything we're talking about and all the exciting ideas we all have can come to fruition, and hopefully it'll do that through a lot of our efforts. So love to answer questions, have a conversation. Thank you all for letting me speak with you today. Yes?
When you say BIM
Yes.
Brian says building information modeling
Mhm.
is a process,
Questions for the audience.
Yes.
not a software.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So to me, it seems like there's a lot of space for that to happen.
Of course.
My concern is that the development of these tools could end up limiting the creative thought process so that it fit inside the tool's possibility,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to reaching out further and pushing beyond the limits. And how are you addressing that?
Fair enough. So the question was, BIM is a process, not just a single tool. So how do we address the kind of fear or notion that that could in somehow limit people's kind of creative nature and the ability to move beyond what that tool can do? And it's a great question, and it's one I get quite a bit, especially when we start talking about this, right? So BIM is a process. It's a tool. It's not a solution, right? It's part of the solution to the problem. And so the way I always address that and the way that we're talking about it in a lot of these things is that you're looking at the process of how does it impact the ability to manage, and on the construction side specifically, which is where my focus is, how do you use these tools to be a better manager, to better control projects? And now that we have the ability, how can you make the tools better to do what we need to do to be more efficient and better? Same thing on the architecture side, right? How do we take our creative design and then use the tools to make it easier for everybody else to understand and more efficient to build so that that can happen?
I guess
Mm-hmm.
the current trend of the amount of building we have to do to keep up with the population exceeds anybody's imagination
Right.
now. And how does this help the building industry address the critical criteria
Mm-hmm.
associated with that? We have changing demographics of people, and what they need is different than what it was 30 years ago and 10 years ago. How is that being worked into this process of teaching people how to use this?
So the question, I guess, is how do we address the changing demographics and the need for ever more housing, buildings, all those things at a breakneck speed, right?
Less carbon footprint,
Right.
less energy.
How are we being better, right? How can we be better? And I think that the answer to that is that, of course, these tools and what we all know and love can't solve those problems on its own, right? It's part of the solution. And so part of that becomes from the other side of that educational component, which is what else is being taught that this all supplements. And that's the important thing.
I guess I see this to be how to describe it. I have this concern of the whole path right now, the momentum of everything having a certain process today has to make a dramatic shift to get where we need to be.
So it has to make a dramatic shift in what way?
Well, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
AI is targeting, 2050 as being, carbon neutral and,
Mm-hmm.
zero net energy.
Right.
How is the tools going to provide us a way to measure that as we move forward?
Right. So I think all of these tools, so the question is how can these tools help us get kind of to the places that we're expected to get to, which are far-reaching from where we are in a lot of cases, right? And I think the tools enable that in that you can create additional efficiencies in the things that that are repetitive and can be automated to allow the human aspect, the problems that we have to solve as humans, we can focus on that and not so much the repetitive nature. So I guess an easy example I can use is, on the drafting that we're doing with Eagle, we have a lot of design options, right? A lot of standard things that you want this bathroom, this bedroom, and it's kind of a watered down example of what you're asking, but I think it might get the point across. All of those things are pretty standard, right? Which one do you want? So what we've done with the software is we've made that a button click through design options to finish it, so now we can provide to the homeowner the customizations that they want in a better way, in a more efficient way, and give them the opportunity to get the home they want. So it's a little bit of a different example, but it allows us to take the monotonous work that just needs to get done and put through and move that aside to allow us to get to the important things that we're trying to solve. And not everything can obviously be automated, but the things that can, now we can focus on the important stuff.
This software allows
Mhm.
transform things into different software usage.
Mhm.
Is that impacting the construction process, more automation used to produce pieces of these customized buildings
Mhm.
at this time, or is that even thought about?
Yeah, of course. So automation in construction, especially, it's lagging behind in this country as opposed to some other markets. But the automation component, the pre-manufactured component, the ability to kind of panelize structures and do those sorts of things is 100% being thought about. There is some resistance across the board, as you can imagine, from people thinking, well, it gets too boxy or too square. But with a little bit of creative thought, it can be done correctly. So the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, so the new basketball arena that they finished a number of years ago, that was done using Dassault systems. So it didn't use Revit, but they used Dassault systems. And essentially that whole facade was all pre-manufactured components drawn out of that system that were all freeform and driven by architectural design concepts. And then it was able to be panelized and packaged down and brought out so they could do something that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford to do, but now they can because they can make the most of that manufacturing component. Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of examples of that.
Yeah.
See that this process is going to get accelerated as tools.
Yes, I think so. I think the acceleration of the process as the tools become easier to use, we're able to create interfaces that allow people to access the information and data they need to solve that problem without the back end that we all know can be very complicated. I think we'll be able to start to see it move forward a lot more efficiently. Kind of break down the barrier to entry to allow people to start accessing some of this information without kind of the scary, here's everything, take the pieces you want, right? How can we trim it down and make it easier for people to use? Yeah.
So a lot of what you're doing is to help educate BC with career paths.
Mm-hmm.
What are your strategies and what are you doing for other folks that want to do more traditional construction or design professions, say superintendent or an estimator? How are you helping them to understand that it doesn't matter what your position is,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be using these tools like it or not?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. So the question was, doing a lot to try to help people who want to go into the VDC space understand what it means and what the opportunities are, but how are we helping those who don't necessarily want to be in that space, but have other career opportunities that will still be impacted? What are we doing to help them understand that? And it's a great question because it's one of the things I got the most at the University of Florida was they'd go into the BIM course and they'd say, I don't really want to take this course. I don't plan on modeling ever, so I don't know why I need to be here. And so part of it is an education by the professors in those other courses that everything that is happening in construction will be impacted by this data. It will be impacted in some way, right? So they have to understand how it impacts them. So we did a lot of coursework design, and a lot of universities and different organizations are starting to find ways to bring this information into those other courses. So estimating is a great example. So developed a course flow where you do the hand takeoffs, because you have to know how to do that. Then you do it the traditional way with an on-screen takeoff or something like that, and then you do it a third time using the modeling software, where they're not actually creating the model, they're pulling the data from the model. So that's a good way of integrating it into that space where they can see, okay, just because you don't want to touch the model doesn't mean you can't pull data from it and it can't be useful. And to help expose students to that so when they get out into the industry, they know what to ask for, right? So they can ask that question. Hey, do we have a schedule in Revit for this information that I could get imported in, so they know what to ask for. Generally, once you go through one or two exercises and the courses start to show the other side of Revit, which is not just modeling, right, it's the data, students really start to realize that was a lot easier. I didn't have to count doors with a highlighter. I like that. How can we use that more? And so it's a little bit of, it's a holistic look at the education process to help kind of bring it up to speed with what we all do every day, which is use data effectively. So it's not just about how do you hand take something off or hand write a schedule, it's how do we use this data to make that part of your job more effective. Good question. All right.
Well, Nathan,
Thank you very much.